Hi folks, a topic that I haven't seen spoken about much or written about much is one of rain and water getting into your scabbard. So the first thing I want to say is, and this is mentioned in 19th century sources and more recent ones as well in regards to military issue swords and bayonets incidentally, and that is that if water rain or any kind of moisture gets into your scabbard and starts to cause rust on the blade inside the scabbard. This is a real problem for various reasons, and I'll go into in a second. But essentially, that scabbard is, by some people, regarded as ruined, because once you've got active rust inside a scabbard, and it doesn't matter whether it's a steel scabbard or a brass scabbard or a leather scabbard or a wooden scabbard, once rust is on the blade and you've kind of got that moisture and the rust inside the scabbard, it's very difficult to get rid of it. And for those of you who collect antique swords and have maybe cleaned up and restored antique swords, you'll know that if you get an antique sword which has got rust on the blade and you clean the rust off and you put it back in the scabbard, sometimes the rust will come back, and sometimes that seems to be because there's some kind of moisture living within the scabbard. I'm afraid that I don't have any great advice on how to eradicate it, but generally applying some oil to the blade and letting some sort of oil get into the scabbard is a good idea. Although the caveat to that is that with leather scabbards you've got to be a little bit careful, because the type of oils that you normally use on a steel blade or iron and steel in general do tend to rot leather over a period of time, and I believe that's one of the reasons why leather scabbards often perish is because people apply lots of grease or oil to a sword or a bayonet or a knife, and this kind of gradually rots the leather that makes up the scabbard. But the main topic I actually want to mention, and hopefully will be brief on for once, is that the real reason why you don't want moisture and rust to get into your scabbard is not because it will make a mess of your sword blade, because actually, you know, my ethos as a sword is a tool, is a weapon, and in actual fact a rusty sword will often still cut and perform just as well as a shiny sword. Okay, so it will still perform as a tool, as a weapon just as well. But the main reason, historically, that you didn't want a sword to start rusting in the scabbard was not for appearances. It was actually because if you suddenly need to pull your sword or knife or bayonet out of the scabbard in order to fight, to defend yourself, if there's rust in there, it can get stuck. Okay, again, those of you who collect antique weapons like myself will know that sometimes a sword will, or a bayonet or any other weapon, will get stuck in its scabbard simply because some rust has got on there, inside the on the blade inside the scabbard, and of course this creates friction. If you've actually got a steel scabbard against a steel blade, the rust can act like a glue and stick them together. But even if you've got a wooden or a leather scabbard, the rust on the blade essentially creates a sort of a binding, as it were, between the two materials. And you know, if some water's got into your sword and someone attacks you and you suddenly go to pull the sword out and you can't, then you could be cut down and killed. So it's very important to keep a blade lightly oiled and free of rust in the scabbard. And I know of one explicit historical account from the 19th century where a British officer is reporting this incident, and he was faced with an opponent. It happened to be a tulwar in a wooden scabbard, and the guy came towards him and went to draw his tulwar out of the scabbard, and it wouldn't come out. Okay, so he cut the guy down. And, you know, so it went in his direction. It was a good thing for him. He didn't have to fight the guy. The guy was clearly, his intention was to fight him, but he couldn't get the sword out of the scabbard. And he doesn't explain exactly why. He said it was just stuck in the scabbard. But during this period of campaigning in India, there was a lot of rainfall, so my guess would be that it would probably a bit of water had got into the scabbard, and the rust had essentially bound the blade to the wooden scabbard. You can free them, of course. You can apply oil and sort of bash the scabbard a bit until you can break the binding between the rust, and then you can get the sword to come free. But clearly you don't want to have to do that in a combat situation where you want to be able to get your sword out quickly. So there we go, that's the main reason that you don't want rust to get onto your blade or inside your scabbard. Thank you.